Right, let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, broadcaster Danny Kelly and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona. So welcome, thank you very much for joining me both. It's really good to see you again. So let's talk. I'll start with you, Albie, because, I mean, the whole, what I was really trying to say is that freedom and being able to express views, even though we don't agree with them, is a real strength. And we should stop looking at ourselves as if, oh, well, you know, they've watched Partygate, see how weak we look and all this sort of thing. Because actually the strength of being able to express that without fear of persecution is something that we hold dear in this country. Where do you stand on what's going on and your thoughts on Vladimir Putin?
My thoughts on freedom and free speech are pretty much exactly the same as yours, Nana. It is a privilege that we have in this country and in the West to live in a Western liberal democracy where we're free to express views. And if we come across views that we disagree with, we debate them. We debate them civilly, politely and well, rather than descending into war, as we're seeing in Ukraine. And I think it's absolutely shocking that we are seeing a state-on-state warfare in Europe. You know, tanks rolling through a European capital and civilians' residences being bombed by an enemy state. I don't think that's something any of us would have thought we'd ever seen in our lifetimes. And I feel that perhaps the West, and particularly Europe, has become a little bit complacent with our way of life, thinking that things were just always going to go in this liberal direction. And we've been shown that that's not necessarily the case.
Very, very eloquently put. Danny, what's your view?
Well, of course, freedom of speech is a privilege that we enjoy in this country, but freedom of speech isn't necessarily readily available in Russia, ironically. And he can control the internet to a certain extent. He already regulates heavily what Facebook posts.
Well, he tried, but it's not quite working out for him.
No, it's not. But to say to infer he's impotent when it comes to things like that. The Russian people I feel sorry for, I think they've been indoctrinated by this guy, who by the way...
But they're not stupid, and they do also have the internet, so they could look.
Yes, yeah, correct, but they don't have freedom of speech. The internet is heavily regulated. As soon as Putin needs a bullet in the head as soon as possible, because he could cause the next world war.
Just on the very quick point about the Russian people, Danny, one of the things that I have been really felt quite pleased about was that we've seen thousands of people protesting across Russian cities. I believe around 1,000 Russians have actually been arrested by the Russian authorities for protesting. We've seen, you know, Russian public figures come out, like the tennis player who in Dubai wrote on the camera, "No war, please." You know, this isn't necessarily something which we saw happen with Crimea or with Georgia in 2008. So I think there is a sense that maybe this war isn't as popular with the Russian people as Putin would like it to be. And I think what we need to do in the West is think about what can we do to influence the minds of the Russian people, because that is what is probably going to scare Putin the most.
There needs to be an uprising, a military coup even. There needs to be some change with the leadership of Russia. And Poland, for example, have refused to play Russia in the football. Formula One refused to have Russia host the Formula One race. And little things like that will all add up. Boycotting Russian vodka. People are now starting to boycott Russian vodka. But my point is that all of these little tiny things, piecemeal, will actually get the Russian public so angry with this guy that maybe there will be some sort of uprising. I'm sure one of the generals... It's so unpopular, this war. There's no bogeyman.
Well, I mean, I don't think we need to be careful.
Except him.
Well, we need to be careful with comments about, you know, Putin and that sort of assassination thing. Only for the fact that we are in a situation which is a war situation. We don't really want to incite anything to make things worse in terms of Russian. But let me just make a point about all of this now. And I hear you saying we need to do things like that, but there are things we could be doing which we're not doing. And we talked about the SWIFT banking system, but that was only the SWIFT banking system that is the interbanking connectivity. That's not the SWIFT payment system for the gas that we're consuming. So we've left that open, you see. So we are very selective about what we're saying and what we're doing. And I think that we need to take a reality check here and get on with doing things that will really cause Putin damage, in a sense, rather than talking about it, pretending we've done everything available when we haven't. We simply haven't.
I completely agree with you, Nana, but one thing that we do have to be careful of, and this isn't often something which is discussed, is that if we totally exclude Russia from SWIFT, there are other international payment systems available. For example, the CIPS system, the Chinese system. And if Western sanctions against Russia push China and Russia closer together, and then that becomes a stronger union, if you will, then that could damage Western security in the future. So I do think we are walking on a tightrope with sanctions at the moment. Yes, I want there to be more sanctions, but I absolutely do not want that to cause more instability in the future with the rise of China.
No, but my point is that we are saying that we've, pushed them out of the SWIFT banking system, and we haven't.
No,
so that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I think it's a good idea. I think we could do something much better than that. I don't know, I'm heading towards Danny's line, but, that's, but what I'm saying is when they're saying that we've taken them out of the SWIFT banking system, it's not entirely true.
Maybe I was clumsy earlier on, but I don't think anyone would shed a tear if he was to die, Vladimir Putin. And I don't think it's...
but it's not that. It's not that.
No,
we can't incite violence against anyone, even if they are horrible.
I think you can against Putin.
No, well, you can do it in your house, but not on TV.
No, OK, but I'm speaking like a normal, everyday bloke in the street. This guy now has put his nuclear army regiment on a war footing.
But didn't we know that? That's what he was saying when he was saying that he will atrocities.
So me suggesting that the world would be a better place if he died, I don't think that's unreasonable.
I think we have to be careful if people were to infer that you were calling for Putin's assassination.
I am.
I think we've got to be quite careful.
No, we do have to be careful.
Why do you have to be careful?
Well, it's quite simple, Danny, because it's my show and I don't fancy being taken off air, so we'll stop there.
I don't think you'd be taken off air for that.
Maybe you will be. But I'll be honest with you, we can't speak like that in a respect, only because, and it's not that people wouldn't think that is a right move, it's just simply that we can't incite that on air. That's as simple as that. And I'm afraid that's just how it goes. But, if we come back to the idea that we need to do something, what is it that you think we can do? I mean, Albie, have you got any... Because we look at the sanctions, they don't seem to be doing very much. I understand you don't really want to push Putin into the arms of China, although China are quite intelligent and abstained from the vote in the UN Council. So they're in there, but they're ready to come over and take over the whole thing, I suspect. So what else can we do?
I think we need to be building a much stronger military presence on the NATO-Ukraine border and on the NATO-Russian border to really show Putin that actually, if you are even thinking about invading a NATO nation, we mean business and we will defend ourselves. And I don't necessarily think that has been happening enough, or at least it's not been being spoken about enough by our leaders. I think the stance that Boris Johnson has taken on this has actually been remarkably strong. Even when he was Foreign Secretary, he actually dealt with the situation with Salisbury remarkably well. And I think that's coming back now. And I just think we really do need to be much more tough in how we're talking and also how we're treating people like Russian oligarchs who holiday in Europe, who have their children educated here in Britain at our top elite private schools, at our elite universities, who have properties in London, and really start to limit this kind of lavish lifestyle that a lot of rich Russians are used to. And then maybe they'll start thinking, no, we actually want to keep our nice lifestyles and therefore we need to be opposed.
Yeah, there has to be pressure, third-party pressure put on this madman. OK, forget the incitement to violence, but politically there needs to be third-party pressure put on him. I hope there's a political uprising amongst the citizens of Russia. 1,000 people arrested just shows you the measure of this guy, how paranoid and petrified he is of any sort of democracy. I genuinely believe, though, little bits and bobs of cancellation of Formula One, of football, of tennis, of any commercial enterprise that we have a relationship with Russia, just to hurt them, so that collectively they say, we've had enough of you.
Well, just so the people themselves can see the impact of all these things will have on their everyday lives, rather than just watching, you've just, you've brought a tank through, you've killed a load of people, well, that's war, fair enough. But if it actually starts to directly affect people and their everyday business, then perhaps it might help to make a difference. Right, so, you let me know your thoughts. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. So welcome back. It's just coming up to 38 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Let's get back into our Great British debate this hour. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has raised concerns about military preparedness here in the UK and whether cuts to defensive spending have left us vulnerable. So I'm asking, are British armed forces ready for war? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by Albie Amankona and Danny Kelly. So, let me see. Danny, do you think we're ready for war?
Listening to Colonel Richard Kemp, It was stark to hear him say that the British military have 140-odd tanks. As I understand, the Ukraine army have destroyed around about 120 Russian tanks, which would leave us with 20-odd tanks. That just goes to show how disproportionately underwhelming our military presence on a geopolitical scale is. 72,000 full-time squaddies. I'm not sure how many territorial army we have. So to answer your question, if in isolation the British Army is not ready for war, the US Army, one would hope, as far as NATO is concerned, would be ready for war.
Do you think? I think they left all their stuff in Afghanistan, didn't they? All their Black Hawks and things.
You see, Putin's Putin's not soft. He may be a maniac, but he's a genius as well. And I worry that he is going to maybe just prod gently to the Eastern European countries like Poland. Maybe there'll be like a false flag operation or something.
That was my view, because I looked at that and thought, and I mean, obviously, I don't want to, it's not a conspiracy theory, this is just my view. I've not read anything that says, oh, this is happening. I just thought, well, looking at it, and it's very difficult to think like somebody like Putin. I mean, I was talking about my sister. There's some people will do things you didn't really think they were going to do because you thought that's not what you would do. But they don't think like that. I'll give you an example. My little sister, what she would do is, instead of, I would do something she didn't like, and what she would do was then cut the corner of my pencil case, so all my pens would come sliding out. I never thought of that, you know what I mean? And when I say that, I say it in relation to people like Putin who have these, they'll do these things that you wouldn't even consider. I mean, nobody thought that he would go in and behave like that. And now he's talking about nuclear weapons. And if he's talking about that, then which countries can he reach?
Yes, I think it's a very important point to raise this idea that we never know what Putin is going to do, and therefore it's hard to predict what's going to come next. And I think on the specific point about whether or not the British Army is ready for war, I'll come back to my earlier point about my opinion that Europe has become complacent with our way of life. And I think that's been reflected with military spending, not just here in the UK, but also in Germany, for example. And I was really pleased, actually, to see the German Chancellor today commit to spending 2% of their GDP on defence by, I think it was 2024.
But that's NATO. They should have done that anyway.
They should have been doing it all the way through, and actually just 1/3 of NATO countries actually meet that 2% commitment.
And that President Trump pointed that out.
President Trump pointed that out, and that was one of the things which I really respected him for. But on the specific point about the UK Army, obviously we're not in a good position where the whole UK Army could fit into Wembley Stadium with some extra space as well. And whilst we do have quite a powerful Air Force and Navy, we do absolutely need to be investing into foot soldiers as well.
Do you think our other problem is that we talk too much? So if you go, we have no idea of the capability of China because they don't say anything and word does not get out. In fact, nothing gets out of there. The same with Russia. We don't know the full capability of their army because, well, they probably kept it pretty quiet. Whereas here we all know that there's how many tanks and there's this and there's that. Do you think that we talk too much as well? So we kind of give away any military secrets that we have?
No, I don't think we could accuse the military of giving away our
but
secrets.
Us as well in terms of media and everything else like that. Do you think we talk too much about it?
Earlier on, Nana, you were talking about the merits of a free society, and part of that is transparency.
Well, that's the thing. Isn't it?
So we can't be saying, on the one hand, saying we love that we live in a free and democratic society, and then saying we should be less transparent. We need to have a military to defend freedom and transparency and democracy, but I don't think we should be going away from our values in order to conquer the
But do you not
Russians.
think that that's a level of, whilst it's a power to speak out and be able to be transparent, there's a weakness there that then you give those who don't think in the same way as you a level of ammunition that could be quite damaging?
I worry, just to go back to Putin for a second, I worry that in a bizarre, maniacal way, he will see us as being complicit in the fight, in a military fight, in the sense that we've supplied all of these incredibly successful anti-tank Javelin missiles, which are holding them back. I think you said earlier on that we're going to see tanks, or we're seeing tanks rolling through a European capital. They're not there yet in Kiev, but potentially. I think he may say at some point, unless you stop supplying the Ukrainian army, I see you as being part of this and complicit.
Well, I think that's what he's saying anyway, but we are complicit in any case because we're paying him, we're supporting him, we're buying his gas. Across the world, we're paying for him to do this. So whilst we try and help him one end, the real way we could help, and I'll come back to the whole SWIFT thing, is stop buying their energy. If we stop today, then that's what's funding all of this in any case.
And that's why Germany's so compromised. 40% of their fuel, their gas comes from Russia. Putin knows this. Putin has played a blinder He is like a James Bond evil genius. He knows this. And over recent years, Donald Trump, right, I like Donald Trump. I don't know how you feel about Donald Trump, and I know you're pro-Trump. But when he was in office, he gave a rollicking to European leaders who part of NATO to say, why are you being compromised with Russian gas? It's almost like he was prophetic. He could see something like this coming.
I don't think he's that prophetic. Even I could see it. I've been saying, why would you sell your water off to foreign countries and other people? Why would you sell all your resources that are vital for life? Why would you do that? It doesn't make sense anyway.
Just to come back very quickly on this point about Putin being a genius, I don't actually think Putin is a genius, to be honest. A lot of defence analysts are saying that actually the Russian army doesn't have the capacity to hold Ukraine for a very long time, even if it does manage to take Kiev. You know, Ukraine is a country of 45 million people. They've been showing a lot of resistance. And I think to call Putin a genius is something which Trump said. He's not a genius. There's been a lot of resistance, even in Russia. Protests, 1,000 people arrested in Russia.
Though.
It's not stopped him yet. The war's been going on since last week. Let's see what happens in the future. But I just want to really come back at this idea that Putin is some kind of evil genius who knows exactly how to overthrow the West. And let's see what we can do and have some belief in the systems that we have in place to tackle these problems.
Oh, but he's rolling tanks into the Ukraine. Militarily, he knows NATO's weaknesses. OK, genius seems a complimentary description, but he's highly intelligent when it comes to what he's trying to achieve.
But it's not going to plan. We're hearing lots of defence analysts coming out saying that Putin's invasion in the Ukraine hasn't gone to plan. And actually, that's one of the reasons why people think that he's been pushing so hard for talks between Russia and Ukraine, which are now happening on the Belarusian border, because actually the military plan isn't going as well as he thought it was going to go. So let's see what comes of these talks.
Well, you don't know that. You're just listening to people on the internet.
Who are you listening to?
Well, I'm just looking with my eyes at Russian tanks rolling into Ukraine.
But what are you looking at?
I'm looking at a military strike.
Where are you looking at these Russian tanks? So is that
BBC News, GB News.
The same thing, isn't it? You're looking at news as well.
How do you say that commentators are saying it's not going to plan?
No, well,
how does anyone know what his plan is? How do they know what's going through his mind?
He wouldn't have planned it so that he would have planned it probably to get in a bit more swifter and a bit more easily. This isn't as easy.
You don't know that.
Well, you can see. Well, I suspect that if you
it's a suspicion.
Well, but we are entitled to suspect.
No, I know, but I think listening to someone opine about whether it's going well isn't justification to say that it's not intelligent.
Well, let's put it this way: none of it's going well. It shouldn't be happening.
Of course not. I agree.
So, if we look at it in that respect, it shouldn't be happening. But as ever, this show is nothing without you and your views. So let's welcome one of our great British voices. This is your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you really think about the topics that we're discussing. Graham Waugh is from Luton. Graham, thank you for joining us. We're talking about the preparedness of the British Army. What's your view?
Well, I think the British Army, they've got a lot of, they used to be one of the best in the world, but nowadays they don't need to be soldiers on the ground. I believe we could do it diplomatically, we could do it by cyber attacks, we could do it, but there's so many other ways than having soldiers' feet on the ground. And why is it that we need to stand alone? If this is a NATO operation, then collectively NATO is strong enough to defeat the Russians, in my estimation. However, I heard on the news the other day that there was a lot of money seized, hundreds of millions of dollars of Russia's money. Oh, use that. If he wants to start a fight, he can pay for it. The lad. So our country is in a huge mess financially. So why should we get any more debt because of it? And do you know what? It's never any of the decision makers that suffer. It's always the man on the street that suffers. And this wakes me up.
That's always the way, isn't it? That is always the way.
Yeah.
Graham, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you for your views. Of course, the war is devastating. Let's have a quick come back to the panel very, very briefly on that. What Graham's kind of saying, it's always the man on the street that suffers anyway. But with a view to the army, what do we need to do, the British Army? Do we need to get more people trained? How can we move forward?
It's going to be a long process to get the British Army back up in terms of numbers after the cuts that we've seen, since 2008. So it's not necessarily an easy fix to say, yes, we are going to recruit more soldiers, because that takes time. But at least we have a stronger Navy and a stronger Air Force. But we'll just have to make sure that we're not being complacent in the future, making sure that we're making the army appealing to all people, and increasing the numbers of soldiers that we have.
Another great vox pop from a GB News viewer. A very strong Luton accent I picked up there.
Luton, yeah.
Very strong. And he talks a lot of sense, He says that...
Scottish, though. He's got a Scottish...
Yes, I did think it sounded very Scottish.
Yes, it was, yes. Oh, no, you got the irony.
Luton accent.
Yeah, of course, he's a Scottish guy, yeah. I tell you what, this morning, I can't remember, the Defence Secretary,
Ben Wallace,
said, if you want to go and fight...
Ben Wallace.
Foreign Secretary, forgive me. Said, if you want to go and fight in Ukraine, go and fight in Ukraine. And I can tell you now, I would be too cowardly to do it.
Yeah.
I would be too craven to do that.
Yeah, well, most people would, to be honest, but it's a sense, if you had a family and a real love for your country, you would go. And if they might send you to fight for the UK in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right.
You'd then have to go. Right, before I see what my panel make of all the major updates in the situation in Ukraine, the EU has announced that it is going to close its airspace to Russia, and RT and the Sputnik to be closed down in Europe. Let's see what my panel make of that very briefly. They're shutting RT and...
I watched 10 minutes of RT this morning just to see how it was being reported from the Russian side of things. And they are saying that the Ukrainians are committing genocide, bombing towns on the border.
Oh, really?
Yeah, honestly, it's just so crazy, this thing. So I'm pleased. If I can have an opinion on whether that should be closed down, I'm pleased.
Yeah.
I've never watched RT. My only concern is that in retaliation, they might close down Western media outlets in Russia, and it's those Western media outlets which are reporting on things honestly and maybe influencing the Russian public. So we just have to be mindful of that.
Well, the Russian public must have the internet, and surely they must be knowing. This is why I'm glad that we have this freedom of speech and the internet, and that actually people like Putin do not control those things, and that is a good thing. I'm asking if we should be more self-sufficient with our energy supply. Let's see what my panel make of that. Let's see, what do you think? Do you think we are too dependent on things outside our control, Albie?
I'm absolutely in favour of energy independence, and I think that can happen through a number of ways. It could be through fracking, rather. It could be through exploration at the Cambo oil field just off the coast of Shetland, which has also been put on pause. But it also could mean, a bigger focus on renewables and also nuclear. I think we need a mixed energy policy going forward. Fracking is very unpopular in the communities that it affects. And there's something that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable about Southern Tory MPs where fracking, it's not going to affect their constituents, basically saying we want to frack up in the north. That just makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But in principle, I'm not opposed to fracking. I just think we need to be listening to the people who it's going to affect.
And quickly, Danny, from you.
Well, they're remote areas in the northwest or the northeast. So London MPs, you don't have anywhere where you could start fracking. Like you, I think we should be more self-sufficient, I really do. In America, where they have tens of thousands of fracking wells, about 50 or 60% of all of their gas and oil is generated from those wells. And look at the price of a gallon of petrol in America.
Yeah, well, yeah, don't. Otherwise, your eyes will fall out. But let's have a quick chat with my panel, Danny Kelly and also Albie Amankona. Right, Danny, you talked about how the gas was right underneath our feet, or maybe even your feet.
They could use me as a fracking drill.
Maybe you have another source of gas.
You might get stuck, you might get
you're
stuck
sitting
down
next
the
to the biggest source of gas in the GB newsroom. I'll tell you that right. Why do you think I sit here?
Yeah.
I disagree. I'll go back to your position earlier on and Angela's position that Northerners are going to find it contemptuous that Southern MPs tell them where to frack. Look, I'm a Scouser, and I wouldn't care who told me why my energy was going to be cut by 50%, whether you're a Southern MP. All I'm bothered about is the price of my energy. So I don't think that you and Angela are correct on that. I think there's too much emphasis on people assuming that Northerners hate Southern MPs.
No, I don't think that at all. I mean,
and that's not my experience.
That's not what I mean. My issue is with MPs in certain areas of the country where fracking is never going to happen, basically saying that fracking has got to happen in these other places where it's very unpopular. If we look at where there have been fracking sites, in Lancashire, which is in the north, but also in Sussex, which is in the south, and Alex, actually one of the producers, lives near one of these fracking sites, it's very unpopular with those constituents. So if the government and these fracking companies like Cordrilla want to work with the communities which are going to be affected by fracking to make it more popular in those areas, so there is support for fracking in those areas, then I'd be behind it. As I said, I'm open-minded towards fracking, but we need to take the communities that are going to be affected by fracking with us rather than just imposing something.
Well, we're presuming that everybody in that constituency is anti-fracking.
But that's why fracking got cancelled in Lancashire, was because the constituents weren't happy with it.
Well, it got cancelled because of the earth tremors, and there was a lot of pressure put on.
And it was unpopular.
Yes, but I'm not saying it's overwhelmingly unpopular. You seem to think that everybody in the constituency, or the overwhelming majority, think fracking is a bad thing if it's on their doorstep.
Well, but it was.
But that's why it was stopped.
That's why it was stopped, though, Danny. That's what he's saying.
No, correct, but there wasn't like a referendum on it. It was just some lobby groups putting pressure on the local MP who put pressure, I guess, in Westminster. So we're assuming that it's overwhelmingly unpopular. I would argue that we don't know that. If I was a constituent in Sussex and my gas bill potentially was going to be reduced by 50%, and it was explained to me that the reason that they're drilling in Sussex is because it's going to be rich in shale gas, and they can't do it in the southeast or London area because basically everybody lives on top of each other, I would say, OK, well, I understand that. Because my gas bill is going to be
There's actually
reduced.
not much evidence to say that if we did use fracking, that the gas price would go down, because gas prices are, of course, it's a global gas price. The argument is more about energy independence rather than the price of gas. I believe we should be a more energy independent country, but we need to take the communities with us who are going to be affected by gas exploration, so that we don't cause more divisiveness and resentment in society that we already see.
But there is also, sorry, Danny, but there is also the net zero agenda, which is extremely unpopular. But as Angela correctly pointed out, there is an environmental impact with fracking, which is, as she's talked about, the water that they use to pump down the shaft at high pressure, which then brings up all the shale and everything else. And so that there is that environmental impact as well.
But I would argue that there is evidence that if you're self-sufficient, prices come down, because the evidence is in America, where 50 to 60% of their gas and oil, it comes out of the ground through fracking. Now, the price of a gallon of petrol in some states in America is like £2 or something. So that is evidential, I believe, that if you are self-sufficient... For example, look, Germany, they stopped the nuclear energy after Fukushima, OK? And now look at them, 50% of their gas is coming from Russia.
Well, and at least...
And they dictate the prices.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You would dictate the price.
Exactly. So if it's done in the UK, you're in charge of the prices.
That's the thing.
My point.
What do you make of the other sources that we have? So we've got North Sea oil, we've got that we could use. She suggested that we could get on with that quite quickly.
Yes, I think broadly I support a mixed energy policy. And I think when we're talking about fossil fuels, we're talking about fracking being paused. Cambo oil field exploration has also been paused. And I think it's probably better that we talk about these offshore sources of fossil fuels rather than onshore ones, which are going to affect people's homes and make people very upset. I'm not against fossil fuel exploration. I do think in the long term we need to be moving away from it, but there is a stopgap which needs to be filled. And we need to be looking at a mixed energy policy in the future, mostly from renewable and nuclear, some fossil fuel for backup.
Do you think it's time we stop the net zero agenda that we're sort of heading towards the speed of knots?
I think that now we understand what net zero means, I think we should almost have a referendum on it as a society. This is what net zero actually looks like. This is the bills that we are having to pay.
But just very
Do
quickly,
you want it?
Just very quickly on net zero, one of the things that I actually really like about net zero is, at its core, it is about energy independence. It's about saying that we can generate our own energy using natural resources in Britain, which is why I find the arguments about fracking and the arguments about net zero and energy independence are actually quite similar. It's about generating energy using resources in Britain or within British territories. Surely we should be in favour of that.
Well, it is, but it's also saying that certain elements of the energy that is available to us should be shut down. So we're talking coal, we're talking North Sea oil, in fact, even things like fracking. So whilst they're going for the agenda, they're looking at other ways of taking resources that actually currently exist that we could currently use, because they're going for zero carbon, which I don't know whether it's a realistic goal, especially at this stage. But as ever, this show is nothing without you and your views. So let's welcome our great British voice. And this is your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you think about what we're discussing. Nigel Alderson is from Blackpool. Nigel, now, what do you think about all of this? What's your view?
Well, I've got mixed feelings, really, about pollution and potential earthquakes. But as we all know, there's large gas prices coming, and most of us won't be able to afford it, myself included. But the reality is, especially with what's happening in Ukraine right now, God bless them, and even them poor, silly young Russian soldiers, we've got to be more self-sufficient and rely on ourselves more. So if fracking is the way forward, get fracking. But look at other things as well, anything to create power, for, heat for the homes and keep your businesses going. And if we can get fracking up here in the north, it's good for us, create jobs, create some wealth, and get on with it, basically. And Boris, I think, needs to go in and tell everybody we're going to get fracking, and also stop building on greenfield land, because we need to feed ourselves. So Boris has got a lot of work to do. Get on with it. That's what I think.
If he wants to level up, that's a good start right there. Well, Nigel, thank you very much for your thoughts. That's Nigel Alderson. He's a painter and decorator in Blackpool. Yeah, he said that, hasn't he? And, this government have been talking about levelling up. There'll be nothing more levelling to the playing field than allowing a lot of the northern communities around this country to start opening up where they can obtain natural energy from this country, because that's, again, where the wealth is. It's clear that we have a very, very sort of affluent land, and we have resources that we are not tapping on because we're going forward with this agenda of net zero, which actually, if we're not careful, could end up as net zero, because if people like Putin are in power and we are paying for them to be in power by buying fuels from them, then there's no end to what he might do. I mean, nuclear warfare is not something that will be very kind to the environment at all.
Well,
so we need to stop him, exactly. We need to stop funding him, giving him the option to be able to press the button and behave like that. We're worrying about net zero in how many years' time when, there's potentially nuclear war on the cards. It's not great.
No, I mean, it's not great, but I'm actually really glad that we heard from Nigel, who was in Blackpool, which is actually one of the areas which was affected by shale gas exploration. He's very much behind it. And that's what we need to be hearing from all people who are going to be affected by shale gas exploration. My opposition is not to shale gas exploration. It's about making it appealing to people who are going to be affected by shale gas exploration.
And that's kind of where Danny was going with it, wasn't it?
And another great opinion piece from one of our listeners, a working-class lad from Blackpool, who, at the end of the day, in summary, he wants to make sure that he can afford to heat his house. And that's important, the here and now problem.
That is the here and now. The here and now is more important than, let's look at 20 years' time, get rid of our diesel engines. I mean, I'm not keen on that. I was looking forward to buy myself a nice new car. I didn't fancy a Scooby-Doo electric Dodgem thing.
You need a new car, hey?
Oh, God. He's a used car salesman.
Can I just correct you? I'm a used car dealer.
That's what you keep saying.
Not a salesman.
What's the difference?
I own the company.
The
difference is I own the company.
Right.
And someone sells the cars.
Oh, right. But
My wife.
Yeah. Well, listen, today we're asking, should the UK be more self-sufficient with energy? And lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Pete says, of course, this is a big wake-up call. Build nuclear, start fracking till the green strategy is complete. Tom says, of course not. Everyone seems to forget that people don't want net zero for the sake of it. It's because climate change will destroy our planet. Well, that's if Putin doesn't. Joe says, scrap the green tax and utilise the North Sea. Start fracking. Tabitha says, please don't want frack. People don't want fracking in their backyard. It causes earthquakes and pollutes the water. We should do it next. Vladimir Putin's house. Very good on that. I think that's a good time to end our debate. Thank you very much for that. Well, thank you for your thoughts. It's time now, though, for Supplement Sunday, where my panel share some of the stories that have caught their eye. And today, I'm with broadcaster Danny Kelly and also co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona. OK, so first, Albie, you're first to go on. What have you got? It's about universities.
Yes, absolutely. It was a brilliant piece by one of my favourite journalists, Charlotte Ivers from The Times. And she is basically talking about how there are changes in the thresholds for student loan repayments and about how it's going to actually hurt middle earners the most. So basically, the threshold for student loan repayments is coming down from about £27,900 to £25,000. So people on lower incomes will start having to pay them back. The period that you pay off your student loan has also been extended from 30 years to 40 years. And this policy, of course, is not going to be very popular with students and young voters. And Charlotte does an excellent job in her journalism of highlighting that actually there's not much by way of policy that attracts young people nowadays to the Conservative Party, whether or not that is through housing policy, whether or not that's through university policies. There's not very much attracting young folk to the Conservative Party, and that is a big concern for me, because in the long term, I want people to be thinking, you know, I want to vote Conservative one day. And what we're seeing is the shift that happens, I think it's around the age of 40, where people move from being more left-wing to more right-wing economically, isn't happening, and policies like this don't help.
Well, is there anything attracting anyone to the Conservative Party? I think that's the question. What do you think of that, Danny?
Well, look, I agree with my learned colleague, possibly for the first time of the afternoon. And yeah, it makes sense. A lot of sense spoken there. And things are never easy. Things are never binary. But,
well, most things worth having aren't easy, Danny. But
No.
what have you found then? Let's talk about...
Now then, I want to know how you feel about the headline, because this is the Daily Mail headline. University warns students Old Man in the Sea contains graphic scenes. So now we're thinking about the word woke and warnings. OK? University warns woke students that Ernest Hemingway's classic novel Old Man in the Sea contains graphic scenes of fishing. But when you actually unpick the story, this is more a story about how graphic the film is. We can talk about whether you should be warned about it. But I wasn't aware. I thought maybe the film was just about him fishing like that and landing a few cod. But it's actually about him catching an 18-foot marlin. And he's unable to actually bring it into the boat. And so what he does, he holds onto the line and he basically, for 3 days, he just keeps a grip of it. And of course, the animal's in incredible pain.
Oh.
Exactly. So initially, the Daily Mail was saying, woke this, woke that. But when you actually understand the story, I mean, lots of youngsters nowadays are vegetarian or they're vegan, and they worry and they care about sentient creatures, and I'm sure that's a sentient creature, an 18-foot marlow. But my story, the spin I'm putting on it, is how graphic it is. Whether we should be warned about it or not, and I don't know whether that's a fair reflection from the Daily Mail, you know, introducing the word woke.
Well, I haven't read the book, so I don't really know.
But it's the movie as well.
Well, I haven't seen the movie either.
No.
So I don't really know still. But I don't really like to hear of things suffering, and I couldn't read a book or watch a film about something, the suffering of something for 3 days.
So do you think a student should be alerted to that?
If it's graphic, I wouldn't mind.
What do you think, Al?
But I'd still watch it if I wanted to.
I don't think there's any problem with warning people about something being graphic. I always think having more information is a good thing so people can make the choice which is right for them.
Yeah, because at the cinema, you're given guidance, aren't you? If you're not
Exactly.
15, you can't watch the movie. And then on Sky, it'll say this contains scenes of violence,
don't think
drug
there's
use.
anything-
Have you seen it?
No,
No.
because I hate animal
I've never
cruelty.
even heard of the film.
No,
Ernest Hemingway, you heard of him?
We've heard of him.
I've
but not
heard
that
of a
one.
cocktail which is named after Ernest
You're
Hemingway.
kidding.
Yeah.
The Ernest Hemingway cocktail.
I mean, I can't remember what's in
drank
it, because
so
most
many.
of the time that I've drunk it, I can't
Forgotten
remember
everything
what's
after.
happened. But I would recommend it. If you ever see a cocktail with Hemingway in it, I would just absolutely buy it.
OK, great. Albie, what's your next one then?
So my next story is about the price of fish and chips, which is set to rise
Expensive already.
to over £10 for the first time ever. But I just wonder where people are getting their fish and chips from, because my local chippy, the fish and chips are definitely over £10. But obviously, you know, there's some London waiting in there because everything's more expensive down here. But no, it is pretty surprising that each ingredient, as a result of the cost of living crisis and other factors, are leading to the nation's favourite dish being much more expensive.
Oh, I love fish and chips.
I love fish and chips. I actually have the
Never.
ingredients, the components of a Hemingway cocktail.
Do you?
If you're interested, the components of a Hemingway, it's the Hemingway daiquiri, is also known as the Papa Doble or the Hemingway Special. The popular classic cocktail is named after the writer Ernest Hemingway, who Albie's never heard of, one of the greatest English literary figures.
I have heard of
He
it.
hasn't-
Oh, you have now?
We've all heard
Only
of it.
because of
We've
the
heard of it.
cocktail.
I just haven't seen the film. All that.
OK, 2 ounces of light rum, half an ounce of maraschino liqueur, which is cherry, I think, half an ounce of freshly squeezed grapefruit juice, 3/4 of an ounce of freshly squeezed lime juice, 1/4 of an ounce of simple syrup, lime wheel for garnish.
I'm salivating.
Back to fish and chips. You're right, everything's more expensive in the capital.
Of course it is. It's the capital city. What would you expect? Well, listen, on today's show, we've been asking, are Britain's armed forces ready for war? And according to our Twitter poll, 33% of you say yes. So 67% of you must say no. I'm going to say a big thank you to my panel broadcaster, Danny Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albie Amankona. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your company.